So this evening we're looking at the area of Kamma. The two friends, Sariputta and Moggallana, were looking for a teacher. And they decided to go different ways. And if any of them came across a good teacher, they would tell the other one. Now the Buddha, once he had had the insight, remember he went to teach his old five companions. And in the first talk, which is where he explained the Four Noble Truths, one of them actually had insight, and his name was Kondanya. And the Buddha rejoiced. He must have thought it's possible to teach people. So he gave him a special name, Anya Kondanya. Kondanya is the one who knows. So one of the other disciples, Assaji, was walking, in the countryside, and when Sariputta met him, he asked him, who's his teacher? What does he teach? And he said, of all the things that from a cause arise, the Tathagata has explained the cause. And this was so inspiring to Sariputta that he went off to find Moggallana, and they both went to the Buddha. Now Moggallana was the one who became very adept at the powers. He had one big obstacle, which was dullness and lethargy, and the Buddha gave him, if I remember rightly, 9 ways in which to work with it. And only after 9 times, only 9 ways, could he decide that he was tired. One of them was rubbing your legs, pulling your ears, doing your acupuncture on your ears. And he was liberated within 1 week. Now Sariputta was more the intellectual, and it took him 2 weeks, which tells you something about the way the intellect can get in the way. However, he did have such a deep understanding that the Buddha also gave him a special title. That he called him the general of the Dhamma. So going back to this phrase, of those things that from a cause arise, the Buddha has explained. In other words, he's talking about causality and the fact that everything has a cause. Everything is conditioned. And he explained a law which sits underneath everything. I believe scientists these days prefer the word regularity. Louisa mentioned it in the talk on dependent origination. The idda paccayata, the law of this and that. And this is, first of all, whatever happened in the past, something happens in the past which causes something to happen now. And if something doesn't happen in the past, there'll be no effect in the present. So this is very simple linear causality, no? Because you didn't look right and left, you walked straight into a car. But because you looked right and left, you did not fall underneath a car. It's very simple. So the other law is, because this happens now, this also happens. If this doesn't happen now, this also doesn't happen now. Now, if the whole universe is based upon a simple linear causality, whatever happened in the past happens now, causes now, it's difficult to understand how there could be any change. It would seem more obvious that the universe would just keep repeating itself. On the other hand, if something happens now only because something else is happening now, with no reference to the past, one can only presume there'd be chaos. Because there'd be no reason for this to arise or that to arise, it would just arise spontaneously. Now when you put these two together, then the Buddha says we understand how the world is both regulated and creative. Creative.
Che è creato. O creativo.
Creative. So for instance, uh, all there was an advert in Piano Ciliegi for this course. So that was in the past.
Cool.
All of you must have looked at that advert and said, I must go. So all of you from all these different places, some of you not knowing each other at all, arrived here on the Friday evening. Because of that, we are now having this course.
Cool.
If you hadn't have come, I would have been very upset. So even if one of you didn't come, it would be a different course. There'd be something different about the course. So you can see how there is some regularity in the universe, but also something which is unpredictable, because you just don't know what things are going to arrive together in any given moment. So hopefully, for the most part, these are fortunate comings together. But sometimes they're very unfortunate. So I was told a story just the other day of somebody driving a car and a cyclist just came right in front of her. They didn't see the cyclist at all. Now, what happened was that the accident was such that the poor young woman, as far as I know, the poor young woman was paralyzed from the neck down. So a question arises as to why, how could such a thing happen? So things happen because of the inability to know what is actually going to happen next. So although in the morning when we get up, we envision the day, I'll do this and this and this and this and that, and then I'll come back home. But it might be that walking under a building, a brick falls on your head. So we have to understand this fundamental law which explains really how things happen, and that there is no particular control. Now, on top of that basic law, we have what's known as the 5 laws. They're just called 5 laws. So these really are much the same as our own. The first one is the law of heat, and this basically is what we mean by our hard sciences. So it's physics and chemistry. Just as a little aside, it's often said in the scriptures that the person who's fully liberated goes out like a flame, and because of that, people might interpret that as a extinction, annihilation. But that's not to understand the science of the time. So if you rub 2 sticks together, fire comes. Now we know these days that this is caused by friction. But in those days, the fire element was everywhere. The heat was everywhere. And when you rub the 2 sticks together, you are drawing this heat energy from around you to the sticks. So the Buddha uses that as an explanation of grasping, of grasping. Now, when the fire goes out, nothing is lost. That heat energy goes back to its original passive form. So our awareness grasps hold of something, and that's your attachments. And by letting go, it reverses back to its own true open nature. So that's just a little aside, in case you think the Buddha's using that to express annihilation, you see. So, for instance, with this law, a few years ago we had that terrible tsunami. The tsunami. Which killed so many people in Sri Lanka and over towards India, etc. Now, in popular Buddhism, they would say that in the past life they must, if somebody drowned in that, they might say, well, in the past life they must have drowned some dogs or something. They must have done something in the past in order for this to happen. And this is somewhat comforting. It seems to give some sort of reason as to why somebody should be drowned, just like that. But in fact, you can't say when something happens, unless it's very, very obvious that it has a direct connection with something in the past. Because remember, all sorts of conditions are always arising in every moment. I'm sure you know this butterfly effect. Yeah, you know, where it's said that even a butterfly wing flapping in say South Africa with supporting conditions becomes a huge hurricane up in Italy.
In Italy.
So you can't really say that anything happens to you has a direct connection with something you did in the past. I think what we can say is that our karma has brought us to this present moment, to this present time. And we are in this environment, this place, and therefore you might say that this has come about because of our past actions. So the reason we're here is because of past action, and whatever conditions there are, all we can do is accept them. But of course, you're always working to try and make things better. Karma doesn't mean that we have to be passive. There's a story I like to tell, which is something that is attached to one of the verses in the Dhammapada. There's a ship sailing on the seas. There's a strong wind, but for some reason it just stops. And the captain doesn't know why. Fortunately for him, there's a group of monks on board. So he asks them to try and work out for some reason why this happened. And after some deep meditation, they came to him with the answer. It was because his wife had drowned many dogs in the past life. And the only way to get this ship moving is to get rid of the wife overboard. I mean, that's one way of getting rid of your wife if you don't want her. Well, of course, he does throw her overboard and the ship moves on. So, yeah, when you do read the scriptures, you do get that impression, this is the unfortunate thing, that something happens directly because something has happened in the past. For instance, it will say, if you're very rich and you've been very stingy, you'll be reborn as a poor person. Now, you might be reborn as a millionaire, but you might still feel very poor. So the next one, so that's all to do with the physical world, yeah? The next one is bija, which means the seed. So this is our biology, yeah? And again, we can make the mistake of thinking that if somebody's born with a genetic disease, that somehow they deserve it. But of course, the body that we have is, what should we say, a fortunate meeting over which we had no control. So did our parents. So we've ended up with this. So we cannot say that the body is my personal karma. So this is important, especially if someone, believes that somehow they deserve to be born with some sort of disease. So that's the law of the seed. Yeah. The next one is chitta, which is the law of our psychology, the mind, the law of the mind. And we talked about that. Louisa talked about dependent origination, and myself about the khandha. So the Buddha has his own understanding of the mind, the heart mind. Remember that for us, the heart and the mind are two different things. But before our enlightenment, the 18th century enlightenment, and the growth of science as an objective study, the separation from the heart and the mind wasn't so great. And for instance, for the Greeks, that was the psyche. And in Christianity, at least early Christianity, it was the soul. And then there was something else, the spirit. Even now in the East, when somebody talks to you, they might actually, and they say, I think, they'll point here, not here. So from, of course, that psychology, you get sociology, because all sociology is a meeting of human minds. And the last one is the law of Dhamma. So these are the Four Noble Truths, Eightfold Path, etc. So the fourth one is, of course, Kamma. I think this was one of the insights of what is known as the axial age.
Assiale.
Both the Brahmins who were writing the Upanishads, also Moses, and there was what's his name, Socrates, and even Lao Tzu. So all these people were moving away from the psychology or understanding of a universe that was ruled by different gods. So in that sort of understanding, you're always asking the god to do something for you. So if you want the crops to grow, you have to make a sacrifice to Ceres.
Delle messi.
The day of agriculture. So there were, in the Buddha's time, there were huge sacrifices by the Brahmins to bring, to get the gods to do what they wanted them to do. Hundreds of cattle, hundreds of horses, and so on. It was said to be huge. For instance, the king's offering. So that the gods would support the king. So in the scriptures you'll find the Buddha making fun of people who think that that still works. Because it came to a point where the Brahmins thought if you did the sacrifice perfectly right, the gods had to answer. So either the gods didn't respond or the sacrifice wasn't done properly. So people were losing faith. So the insight of the Buddha, of course, was that our lives are not ruled by the gods. Our internal lives are not ruled by the gods, but in fact by ethical law. And this goes right back to our primary relationship. When he had discovered the unconditioned consciousness within us, he also recognized that the delusion lay in its relationship to this psychophysical organism, in its identity with this, and that's what we call the self. So this ethics, which we can translate as relationship, the moral law is only a part of it. It's about how we relate to everything that we experience. Through this initial wrong relationship of identifying with this body, all the miseries of human life appear. All we want is to be happy. See? Yeah, see. Just want to be happy. And we can all define happiness in different ways, but we all want to be happy. And so we make ourselves happy by acquiring things, money, friends, etc. And this helps us feel safe. But unfortunately, other people want what we have. So therefore we have to defend and hence the arising of aversion. If the enemy is bigger than me, I have to run. Therefore, fear arises. So from this wrong initial relationship, we now form a very delusive relationship with the world we find ourselves. So it's acquisitiveness, aversion, and fear. And when we act from those three, then you can see problems arise. So this was one of the teachings that he discovered, of course, through the memory of his past lives. And Louisa mentioned that. And when he saw people moving from realm to realm according to their actions, what had been a personal law became a universal one. So that, in short, is the law of karma. Now, when we do something harmful, there's no need to punish ourselves. To do that is just to add more suffering on the suffering that's going to come. When we do something which is harmful, all we have to do is bear the consequence. So, in a very simple way, if I find myself getting angry with somebody, there's no point in, saying to myself, "You stupid idiot, why are you getting angry?" It's a waste of energy. What I have to do is sit with the burn inside my heart and make a decision not to be so touchy. when it comes to people breaking the law, there is such a thing called restorative justice. I don't know. So this has been very successful in getting a person to stop thieving or doing damage. Instead of just putting the criminal into a room in a big place called a prison, they have them meet the victim. And when they have this conversation as to the consequences of their action, this often changes the criminal. Yes, I ran a course down in the south of England, and I was driving back to the centre. When you come off the motorway, you actually enter into what we call a dual carriageway. It looks like a motorway. So you have to go from 50, 60, 70 miles, 70 kilometers an hour down to 35. So I was caught speeding. I was only 5 miles over the speed limit. So I was given a notice. There was a fine of £100. It was about 120, 110 euros. Or I could go and see this film which will tell me what happens when you hit somebody at 35 miles an hour. And I thought that is very skillful. Most people, we don't know by our own personal experience what happens to a body when you hit it with a car. However, because I keep the law, I didn't feel I had to see the film. And it was a very long way away, you know. So there are ways to change people's behavior which doesn't include the idea of punishment. That doesn't mean to say that you can get rid of prisons, because there are some people who are definitely dangerous. When we make a decision about something, remember moral decisions are very rarely black or white. You always have to take into consideration the circumstance, the context. So, for instance, as you know, the whole question of abortion is often still discussed in places like America and so. Even in Ireland, they had a recent vote. So we have to be very careful about taking fixed positions. Every situation has to be looked at in itself, really. And in our liberal society, we tend to put the responsibility back onto the mother. But that doesn't mean to say that it's an easy decision, depending on the situation. So often moral philosophers, they give us what you might call thought experiments. If you put fat man on the bridge into Google, you come up with some wonderful things.
Fat man?
Fat man, grosso. No, fat man on a bridge.
Fat man on a bridge.
So, here's the problem, okay?
Quindi qui è il problema. Ecco il problema.
There's a train coming down the track. You're on a bridge with a very fat man. And you can see there are 5 people on the railway line who don't realize the train is coming. Now, the one way you can stop that train coming is to throw the fat man. So, like, what would you do? You see? Now, in all of there's hundreds of examples, all very similar. But not one of them suggests that you throw yourself. Yes. There's another interesting problem which has arisen with self-driving cars. So here's the thought experiment. If you're driving in the middle lane and the truck in front of you, something drops off, you can either go left or right. So if you turn right, you hit a car. If you turn left, you hit a motorcyclist. Now, when you do it impulsively. It's an immediate reaction. So therefore, you would not be considered culpable. See? Vero? See? No. You have to I mean, it happens in an instant. No, you don't have time to rationalize. Now, if you are in a self-drive car, it's driven by an algorithm which has been set by somebody in the past. So now, what is the, shall we say, preference of the algorithm?
l'algoritmo.
Is it to save the driver at all cost? Is it to save the car at all cost? So then it becomes a premeditated occasion. Difficult, eh?
Difficile.
The moral is don't drive a self-drive car.
La morale è
Or if you do, make sure it's to save you. And do remember that when we do something harmful, that you can actually change the consequence. So, for instance, if I say something cutting or rude to somebody, so I can always amend the consequences of that by saying sorry. Of course, you can make things worse. You insult somebody, and then you tell tales about them. Yes, calumny. There's the other side, of course, is that you think you're doing something out of the goodness of your heart, but there's not enough information or wisdom around what you're doing. So therefore, you end up doing more harm. I think a lot of charities who work with undeveloped countries have discovered that. I remember many, many years ago, you used to be able to support one child, because I remember doing it. So the charity said, here's a child, the child needs so much money, etc., in order to have good food, education, etc., etc. And the child would write to you. And some people went out there to visit the child. But of course, in a village of, say 100 children, you got 2 or 3 children who were getting education, good food, and everybody else wasn't. So it created a lot of problems within that particular situation. So here we have a good heart, but not enough information, not enough wisdom. And the other thing is to recognize that sometimes when we do something in the past, it does take time for the consequences to manifest. One of the most horrible things, for instance, they knew in the 50s, even before that this blue asbestos caused cancer. Now I know 2 people who in the 60s and 70s worked for building companies who were handling blue asbestos, and one of them told me that they even threw it at each other like snowballs. 25, 30, 40 years on, they die of asbestosis. So the persons involved in that sort of action, the company directors, etc., etc., they will hold themselves responsible even if the law doesn't. So that sense of guilt will be there within their psyche. And it's the same even now. I read an article that Italy is producing a load of tobacco. It's got a big tobacco industry, even though the people know that whom they're selling them to is going to damage their health.
salute.
So in the karmic law, at some point, that will come up within their psyche. And that sense of guilt and shame that we have when we do something harmful, the Buddha actually calls guardians of our society. If a person feels no guilt when they do harm and no shame, what's to stop them committing whatever? So now we come to this problem, is there moral justice in the universe? Both Franco and Stalin died happily in bed. I don't know whether they were happy, but they died in bed. So this, of course, brings up the whole teaching about past lives and future lives. It's difficult to understand how there could be moral justice if there weren't that process.
If there were
not that process.
Okay.
So the understanding is that sometimes things that we've done 2, 3 lifetimes ago, the consequences do not arise until this life, because the circumstances have not been there to support that conditioning. So this brings us back to exactly what is our karma. It's this psychology that we have now. It's the heart and mind that we are experiencing now. So there are, shall we say, hidden desires within the mind, which, given certain circumstances, might suddenly come out and produce something horrible. And this things like road rage. I think it happens everywhere, but for instance, there was a car came into a garage. A mother and son came into a garage to take some petrol, and the young man got into an argument with these other two men, and they killed him. So that sudden arising of rage, sometimes from nowhere, the person doesn't even know they have it in them. And there are other things happen too, which the person doesn't understand how it comes about. So it's just this understanding that without past life and future life, then you cannot have moral justice. The moral justice is that the unwholesomeness within us has a chance to manifest in order to be purified. And people who have past life experience, much more often than not, remember something which is very unpleasant. And this often is a purification. Because in the psyche as a whole, all our past history is held. And if there is some turbulence right there within the very foundations of it, at some point it has to manifest. And as you know, when these things manifest, it can also manifest as an illness. So this idea of past lives and future lives is, of course, strange to us in the West. We don't have it. But the position is to remain open-minded. Pascal, who was the, I think, 17th century philosopher, mathematician, I think, the 18th century, and also a mystic. He was a bit of a mystic. And of course, in those days, there was also a growing disbelief in a God. So this is called Pascal's wager. There may be a God, and there may not be a God. But it might be good to behave as if there was a God. So I was on a train going down to the south of England, just coming out of London, and rugby fans got on the train, and two of them sat opposite me, and one of them said, "Are you a Buddhist monk?" I said, "Yes, I am." He said, "I don't believe in reincarnation." So I said, "How do you know? Have you died?" And he said, "No, I don't know." So I said, "Well, why come to a conclusion?" And his friend said, "Yeah, why come to a conclusion?" End of conversation. So I think there's a moral there, you see. We always like to think that we know. We feel safe when we know. But I think the wise position is the state of don't know, not sure. So whether there is or whether there isn't, it might be wise to behave as if there is rebirth. Very good. So we started off by going through this basic law, the this that law, that there is an unreliability about the universe. So. I mean, we call it accidents. Sometimes when you have an accident, somebody says, "Oh, be mindful." Well, you were mindful. You just fell over and broke a leg. I know somebody who did that. So he's walking, and people accused him. They said, "You're not being mindful." He says, no, I was mindful. I just fell over." And then there are these 5 laws, similar to our physics and biology and psychology. Yeah. And then there's the law, the spiritual laws, the 4 noble truths, and there's karma. Now, the Buddha said, if you tried to work out your karma, it would drive you mad. So you cannot tell what's going to happen or why something has happened. But one thing I think we can be clear about, that in terms of our liberation from suffering, the karma that we're actually dealing with is the impurity in our hearts. Right. And when the heart finally purifies itself, then the path to liberation has been opened. Oh. And that's why we're all here. Oui. And who knows which of us will become liberated tomorrow. I can only hope my words have been of some assistance.